Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Morn. I'm Director of Member Engagement at the Northern Housing Consortium. As we've said, today is part of a series of webinars that we've been running with Mediaworks, who are supporter members of the NHC, and they're working with a number of housing associations across the north as well. Mediaworks are the sort of digital marketing experts, and the relationship with us is that they help us to broaden the range of seminars and masterclasses like the one today that we can bring out to the NHC's membership. So huge thanks to Mediaworks for organising this one for us today. So at the last session, we looked at user personas, and as Joe's just said, we're going to sort of revisit some of that, so don't worry if you didn't attend that one. But today's focus is going to be more on communications plans and how to create a comms plan that really is tailored to your customers. It's obviously always been important, but I think in light of the social housing white paper, it probably feels even more important than ever at the moment. We'll also be looking at some of the tools that are available that are out there that can help you to create a comms plan that really does feel user-centric. So from Mediaworks today, we have Joe Edge, who is Business Development Manager, and Natalie Newton, who's Content Strategist. So welcome to you both. As Jason said earlier, if you have any questions as we go through, please just use that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and Joe and Natalie will pick them up at the right time. I think will that be a mix of sort of as we go through and maybe a bit at the end as well?
Yeah, feel free to just kind of ask away. I think format for this morning for us really is it's an open forum. Hopefully we're just going to kind of shine a light on what we're seeing, how we structure these things internally, how we're seeing it works. But any questions at all, anything that doesn't make sense, anything you'd like us to go back over, or if you've got any good tips for other people who are watching and you want to kind of put them in there, please do. It'd be really, really useful.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, well, I think that's it from me. So really hope you enjoyed the session now today, and I'm going to hand over to Joe. Are you starting off?
Yeah, absolutely. So cheers, Kate. Thank you for the introduction. And obviously we're all sort of really pleased to be here. So thank you again for the invitation. I think, as you said, key purpose for this morning and for this session is we've talked previously about creating a kind of a communication plan that actually is efficient. None of us have infinite time. None of us have infinite resource budget. And we need to make sure that any effort that we're putting into marketing is being used, and we can actually track that it's being utilized in the right areas. So I think what would probably be useful, I know that there's kind of a couple of sort of familiar names certainly on today, but I think for those of you who aren't aware of who we are, I'll give you a quick 30-second lowdown on just who we are and what we kind of do here at Mediaworks, and then we'll get into the more interesting stuff, I promise. So as Kate said, trusted supporting digital member of the NHC, been working together for quite some time now, and I think that relationship's really useful for us. We're doing quite a lot of work within the housing sector, and it's really good to kind of be able to speak to Kate and the team and understand just exactly what you guys are seeing. It really is kind of information from the ground up. We've got a lot of kind of referenceability across the sector, working with people like Home Group, doing digital transformation projects that we're kind of in the middle of with the likes of Johnny Johnson Housing, working with people like St Modwin Homes on more of a commercial front, kind of down south. What we're also seeing as a business, we've got a lot of experience across the utility sector, and we've spoken about this before, and I'm sure it'll kind of come up again throughout today's presentation, if I remember what to say on my slides. But there was a lot of crossover between utilities from a service point of view, and the way that we want to always give that best user experience through communication to our tenants, to our customers. But also we want to be looking at that wider picture, and we want to be looking at how comms, how marketing, actually it's the way that the whole business should be centralized. There are ways we can drive efficiency throughout the business by just understanding what those key messages are and how to avoid frustrations and contacts into call centers, how to make sure that we are serving customers the right information at the right time, to avoid frustrations. I think that's a really key thing. This year more than ever, that has become relevant for us, where we've had that kind of human touch point taken away. We've got to make sure we're kind of mapping that out. So a little bit of a different style. Those of you who know us and have worked with us in the past, we've gone through a recent rebrand, as I'm sure, a lot of people have. Kate, I know you guys have over the last few months, and we've kind of taken the last year really to kind of reflect on 2020, and I think marketing itself has changed. marketing now is no longer putting a couple of posts on Facebook, but it is that bigger business picture, as I was just kind of saying. So as a business, from Mediaworks' point of view, we've kind of changed our proposition. And it's just to help us kind of better understand the role that marketing plays, and where as a partner, where we can actually be adding value to the wider business, and how we can ensure that marketing is at the center of that. And that does fall into all of the data that you collect as businesses that we've talked about previously. It talks about the technology that you've got in place. It talks about kind of creativity, and obviously that's something that is always going to be really, really important. But then building that together from a strategic point of view to drive performance, drive efficiency. And it's something that, if we get that right, we're actually utilizing all of the assets that you have internally, rather than just running a marketing campaign as a one-off piece of work. Now, we talk about kind of navigating the journey ahead. And again, I'm sure everybody, and there will be nobody watching this today who will say the marketing plan they put in place 12 months ago is the marketing plan that they are delivering now. And if there is, I'm just leave the call. Don't. It's a very, very, very different world, and I'm sure, actually, no. In fairness, you guys, you will have been adapting. You will have been changing this over the last. It's on a weekly basis. The world is changing. The way that our users are changing. So we look at kind of overcoming obstacles, but again, we're kind of fitting this into sort of 4 areas. So marketing is obviously going to drive this, and that's how we're going to communicate with our customers, and be that across a multiple of channels that we're going to kind of talk you through. We've also got to look at our brand, and we've got to look at how our brand resonates with tenants, how our brand resonates with our customers, and how can we change that due to imagery, due to tone of voice, due to the way that we actually position ourselves, again, as a leader within the sector, as a trusted source. But all of this should be drawn upon from data and intelligence. So anything that you do as a business, we've talked about this, and this is how we kind of start to build out our personas, but it's customer call center data, it's tenant feedback, it's tracking through web analytics and through screen recordings, it's online engagement and customer engagement through social channels. All of that forms a barrier of intelligence, and if we can use that alongside sector trends and channel shift, we can start to map out what our customers and how they actually want to be served before it becomes an issue. And that's how we want to kind of start to position this. So I think recapping on kind of the last session that we ran through, and again, like I mentioned before, there's a recording. So anybody who would kind of like to have a little flick through that, I think it's about 40 minutes or so, and we can always kind of send it across. We looked at pulling together all of these different data sources. So online analysis, external analysis, offline analysis. A lot of that is kind of qualitative. We want to be talking to people, we want to be understanding exactly the issues that they're having. We want real-time customer feedback. Some of it is quantitative, and again, we're collecting data, we're looking at data trends. Having that data is stuff that you will all have going on in the background, and it's just understanding where those different data sources are. But we then talked last time about, once we've collected that data, what do you do with it? Because having it's great, but if you don't know how to utilize it, then it just becomes a bit of a pointless exercise. So we talked about kind of pulling that together into a digestible format, which can help inform that kind of marketing approach. So we talked you through the process last time about creating user journeys and creating user personas. And those user personas really helped us understand exactly who our tenants are, what their strengths are, what that makes them kind of feel empowered, what their weaknesses are, and how as a business, how can we help support them? How can we help them build trust? How can we make them feel safe, secure, empowered? That then pulled into a set of user journeys. And user journeys are then us understanding all of the areas you guys are trying to communicate. So is that going to be a user journey which is report a repair? Is it pay my rent? Is it get in touch? Is it get involved? What do we want these users to do? And what do they want to do when they come through to the website, or when they're engaging with you guys again as businesses? Now, once we've got that basis, again, great to have those personas, great to have those user journeys and start to understand our tenants. But if we don't do anything with it, all we've got is a really, really nice set of rules for engaging with our tenants. But how do we put that into action? So today, what we're going to kind of talk you through is really putting together a bit of a battle plan. It's how to help understand how to prioritize your time when resources are infinite, and you've only got a couple of hours to start posting. How do you understand what channels are going to be best to reach your customers? How can you understand what messaging and how that messaging differs per channel and per marketing source? So we'll talk through that. And I think, as was mentioned before, any questions, please do just kind of drop them in the chat below. So I suppose, Natalie, the first question really is, user-centric content, I mean, it's a really, really fancy fancy phrase, but what does it mean? What does it mean? And what does it mean for you guys kind of within the team?
I think just to kind of start off in terms of like definition, I think it is all about kind of creating that piece of content, obviously, that drives emotion within your target demographic. So it's kind of, what do they value? What are their pain points? How can you bring that through within a content asset, which is then obviously visualized in the right format, posted on the right channel, and it's going to kind of resonate with them, because essentially that's the most important thing of how it then becomes user-centric, because you're realistically creating content for a purpose that is also for your brand, but for your customer. And I think that's obviously where the question comes to, is like, are you just creating content for content's sake? And that's something I think that we internally ask ourselves a lot, like, what is the purpose of this? And kind of, so what? Who's going to find this interesting? What channels is this fit for? And kind of, how is this going to look? Because essentially that's why we always start with the user personas, the user journeys, because that is primarily where it all stems from. And I think, like you touched on there, Joe, it's so important, especially within the current time, that this is where it stems from, because we need to create content and be there from a digital standpoint when kind of you can't be face to face with somebody.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you said there straight away is everything we talk about here is probably, it's more of it's one additional step in your process, just to question who you are sending this to, why you are sending it there, and what it is that you've written for them. I think it's a really, really good point. And I imagine that's something where it's just a state of mind, and it's just an additional kind of step within that process. Yeah. So I think one of the key things for us, and one of the things that we have, again, kind of been monitoring over the last year, is bridging that digital divide. Users who we previously engaged with have changed. They have changed the way that they interact with us online. Previous to kind of COVID and lockdown, I think if we look at the difference within kind of adoption rates of digital, it's been massive, and it's been a massive driving factor where a lot of your tenants have been forced to move online. Even for me, the idea a year and a half ago of doing a video call with somebody was just bizarre. Why would I do that? I'll come and see you. It's ridiculous. Now, the thought of going to go and see somebody terrifies me. I don't think I'll ever look at another human being face to face. I think I'll just do everything over a screen forever. But this stuff changes, and the way that we interact with people changes. So across the sector, I mean, we've seen a 31% increase in 65 to 74-year-olds. So accessing the internet within the last 12 months. That's massive. That opens us up to a whole new demographic, which poses whole new challenges. They're accessing the internet, but we need to understand what channels are they using? What in the last year was forced them online, and where are they? Where are they hanging out? How can we make sure we get in front of them in a way that doesn't feel forced for them? 22% of UK consumers increased online banking or bill payments during lockdown. Again, that's huge. And for what I know, a lot of kind of the NHC's partners, one of their biggest challenges is getting people to start paying their rent or kind of making payments online. So whilst we're seeing a general trend of UK consumers increasing online banking, what are we doing as marketers to make sure that we are following that trend, and we're kind of making sure that we're benefiting from that shift? 65% longer views of how-to and step-by-step videos during 2020. Again, I don't know about the people watching, but I know certainly for me, and I don't know about you, Natalie, but if I have a problem now, I will Google how to do it first, and chances are I'll watch somebody halfway around the world tell me how to do it, and I'm answered within 5 minutes. And it is really simple things. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to refill my boiler or make any of those changes, but you can do it if you've got somebody showing you how to do it. Again, I think some of these things are really, really important, because if we can understand and we can make sure that we are producing this kind of content, this again is going to help us reduce reliance upon call centers. If we can make sure that we are serving customers information and content that will allow them to self-serve. And the final point on here, 51% of UK consumers use social media during lockdown to help local communities connect with each other. Again, that's massive. And within your tenants and within again, yourselves as a business, there is this kind of perfect scenario where kind of communities become self-sufficient. We have adopters within communities who will want to run groups, because if somebody has a question, again, the chances are if they've got that question and somebody else knows the answer, 10 other tenants have got the same question. So if we can answer it in one central place, it saves you getting 10 phone calls in about the same problem. And actually people start solving their own problems within communities. So again, something massive that's come out of this year that we really need to be benefiting from. And if it's not part of your plans, it's certainly something I would be building into your plans for over the next year, to make sure that you guys are kind of benefiting from this. So I think what the first place we start with this, and kind of taking the personas and our current tenants kind of out of the mix for a second, we really need to understand our reach. We need to understand what the current strengths and weaknesses of the current marketing mix are. So what we look at internally, and this is something that we always kind of run through with current partners, is what are you currently doing? And without thousands of audits and kind of understanding all the different channels that you're running, I think it's a matter of just mapping them out. It's understanding what is owned, what is paid, what is shared. I think we then kind of split this down. I think kind of question for you, Nat, is when you're pulling together plans for people internally, so from a content point of view, how would you recommend people kind of start to map this out? So if they're trying to understand what channels they're currently running,
yeah,
how can people map that out quite simply so it's referenceable?
I think the first thing that you want to do is actually kind of identify the channels that you are currently working on, and the ones kind of shown on screen are just kind of top level ones. There are thousands and thousands of channels, and I think it can often get a bit daunting in terms of how many channels are out there. But I think in terms of playing to your strength, if you know what channels that you're really strong on, map those out. And even if it just becomes more of a blank piece of paper where you can start filling out, this is what channels I'm on, this is where I'm not active. And I think internally we do it as a kind of like ticky box audit, like I'm active on this, I'm not active here, but I might be active on social media. Is it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? Which ones are you really active on? And then it kind of becomes a channel gap analysis, essentially, in terms of where you are kind of really strong and really active, and then also ones where there is like room to grow in. And I think, again, kind of tying that back into your user personas, it's then you can like overlay those channels onto kind of your user journeys, your user personas, to see, right, okay, well, if I know they kind of actively search, so am I present when people are searching? Or I know that they hang out and they're kind of social centric, am I on the right channels to then target them? And I think in terms of just identifying channels, you guys know obviously yourselves where the strengths and weaknesses lie. So it is just very much like, I would generally just say, like, map it out. It's quite a simple process, like as in like, yes, I do this, no, I don't. And I think obviously in terms of from our perspective, we do that internally, and it's looking at how we can create that kind of analysis in terms of an audit where your content is really good here, but not maybe on this channel. And I think even kind of profiling it maybe against kind of like what your peers are doing in the market as well, and then it becomes more of a kind of a communication plan where you can identify those gaps and kind of build on that.
Yeah, and I think a really, really interesting thing that you just kind of said there. Obviously, if people were pulling together something maybe like a SWOT analysis of their current marketing channels, strengths is obviously going to be channels where you are active, you are publishing content, and your community engage with you. Because if we put a channel such as Facebook in as, yeah, we've got Facebook, we run it, that's great, and we identify it as part of our channel mix, but we've only got 3 people as part of that community, we're only ever going to reach 3 people. So I think that's really, really key, again, for people to understand. You're right. Yes, just because you have those channels doesn't mean that they are running efficiently, but also understanding then the value behind those channels, as we'll kind of talk through, will help you give a priority of where marketing effort needs to be spent. Okay, so I think once we've kind of mapped out just the channels that we currently run, and the channels that you guys will currently be running, currently operating, currently publish content to, I think making sure you're giving things kind of like a traffic light system as a minimum. Green is, yes, we're really good at it and we're really happy with it. Red is, we've got an account, but I haven't looked at it in the last 2 years. We all do that, and we all start an account on something where it's becoming a bit of a trend. But again, time is not infinite, so keeping on top of that, mapping those out and understanding that will then help us understand and shape the kind of content that we need to be generating. So if we take a scenario and something like a new portal launch, let's say, what we don't want to be doing is just publishing a bit of content that says, here's your portal, there you go, it's great. Because whilst that might be the content that goes out, and people might see it and they go, right, they're great, that's my portal. They don't really understand the value, or probably the blood, sweat and tears that have gone in from your side for the last 2 years to actually get it there and get it over the line and get it in front of them, and why it's going to really benefit them. So I think when we look at those channels again, we then break down that kind of content into that kind of awareness, consideration, and then conversion. Conversion is when a user does what we want them to do. They come online, they sign up, they register, they get in touch, they read an article that is self-serve. And I imagine, Natalie, from your point of view, again, we're going to be kind of mapping those channels out to see what stage of the funnel they most engage with users on. So an example would be something like Facebook, I imagine, would be awareness. With YouTube might be awareness, whereas search or targeted emails might be consideration, pulling users through to conversion on site.
100%. Yeah.
So I think for yourself, probably again a good question for people really would be, how would you identify which section that channel sits in? So if you were sat looking at a platform that you're currently green lighted, it's great, you've got some great awareness. How would you sit that against kind of awareness, consideration, or conversion?
Okay, so essentially where obviously we kind of look at it is from kind of awareness, like you say, is very much like promoting your brand or service in front of people who probably don't really know about you. So it's realistically pushing content from a value point of view. For example, like blog posts, infographics, videos, they are very much kind of formats where you kind of can express yourself the most, and these can be used across channels, like you say, social media, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, those sorts of channels. So we can really start to kind of target people and get in front of the right demographic. I think it's just about kind of splitting out what stage you think they're at. Obviously conversion is very much kind of brand focused. You have kind of need to unlock a further benefit. So it's like, how do you get more data from your user and kind of engage with them from a further perspective? I think obviously just in terms of identifying those, I think it's really key to make sure that you do know what channels and kind of what group they sit within. So like we've talked about there, like you owned, you shared, you earned and you paid, what purpose they provide you as a kind of a brand, and how you can utilize those channels to make sure you're getting in front of the right people at the right time. So I think we kind of just bucket it in terms of identifying kind of what channels you are good at, what channels you're not, and then also what content then fits on those channels, because as we'll kind of touch on later on, there's right content types to sit within the right channels. So I think, again, it's just kind of like tying that all into one, laying your audit over the kind of different green light systems, and then obviously making sure that each stage is associated with the right content type. I think that's basically kind of like what we do. I know like considerations more around kind of positioning you as an authoritative figure and kind of a trustworthy and support system essentially. So going a bit deeper in terms of your resources, your how-to guides, anything like that, and kind of building yourself on site as a considerable authority. And like I say, conversions more around those kind of emailers, competitions, anything where we can kind of capture more data and allow the kind of the value to be unlocked further down the line.
Yeah, and I think again, probably one of the key things to kind of take away from that is this is really going to differ against your personas. So what is awareness for one persona and one persona group, and what is an awareness piece of content or an awareness channel might differ across persona groups. Therefore, that's why this understanding piece is so important.
Yeah.
I've just seen we've got a question come through. Yeah. Okay. So the question is, how is this strategy useful in a crisis? I think it's a really good point. I think when we look at this, and we'll come onto this a little bit kind of further down the line, but if you're in a crisis and you need to understand exactly how to communicate effectively with a tenant, they've got a problem right now, or you've got a problem that you need to let them know and be aware of. If we can map those personas out to the channels where we know it's going to have the biggest impact with them straight away, that therefore helps us identify the channels that we need to push that message out on straight away. And it allows us again to make sure that we're targeting that full kind of tenant grouping, rather than sending it out across 2 or 3 different channels. We might end up with a gap. So if we can understand where our strengths are, we can understand where those gaps are and make sure that if we are in a crisis, everybody has been effectively communicated with on their level, on a channel where we know they are going to see it and are more likely to engage with it. I think that's really, really important here.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answered that question. If not, comment again and I'll like. I think we then look at, we look at then identifying our channel. And again, these are very top level, you know, there's a lot more channels than this, but we would recommend, and one of the tools we break down internally when we're looking at awareness, consideration and decision or conversion, we then break this down into those different channels. So as Natalie was saying before, you know, we might think something like PR or out of home or Facebook might be in that awareness driving channel. But what's more, once we start to want to kind of take users through that journey, so again, it might be that we've got a 3-month lead up to a portal launch. We're then looking at things like mail drop, on-demand TV, it might be on-site content, it might be text, it might be paid search, to start nurturing those users through that journey with slightly more poignant content. And again, it's not the asset that we push out through awareness is going to be very, very different to the asset that we push out through decision. It's going to have a very different brand message, but understanding what that user, how they want to be communicated, the channel that they want to be communicated on, will really help us understand where our resources best spent. Now, we want to, again, you know, we've said this over the last few sessions, but our strategy needs to be built around users. Otherwise, we're just creating and we're understanding all the channels that we've got and we're saying, aren't we great? But if it's not the channels that our users are on, then it's a really pointless exercise. So our personas, and again, we talked about this in more detail last time, but our personas and our user journeys will really help us understand what our tenants care about, what are their pain points, what content do they engage with, and most importantly, how do they hang out? So as we've just said previously, we can then use that to help kind of understand, this is the demographic we need to get in front of with this piece of marketing content. Okay, so how do they want it written and where do they want it posted? And at what stage of the funnel do we want them to be at, and how do we move them through that? If we ask ourselves those few questions, we can start to communicate a lot more effectively. And it takes away that kind of guesswork. So we need to understand kind of how our tenants perceive value. And again, value is a really, really key thing here. We need to make sure that we're not leaving any kind of doubts or any kind of questions. I'm just think there's just a thank you there. You're very welcome. We've got, I think we want to understand, you know, are our tenants and our personas, are they excited? Are they cautious about money saving? Are they going to be socially centric? Are they ambitious? Are they optimistic? What empowers our tenants? And how can we make sure that, again, different tenants are going to be empowered by different types of content, and they're going to hang out and see it on different channels. So if we can, again, understand who those users are, where they hang out, and what makes them feel valued, what makes them feel heard, we can therefore start to create content that speaks to them on their level. And they feel like this is a housing association, this is a house builder, this is a partner that really understands them. And I think that's the best thing we can ever hope for from a marketing point of view, is we are marketing to people on their level and they feel understood, they feel listened to, they feel heard. That's going to help us with customer satisfaction scores. It's going to help us with engagement. It's going to help us with following. It's going to help us from a reputation point of view. And it all just comes back down to this kind of mapping piece. So I think what we can then do, and I think Nat, this is probably one of the points you touched upon earlier, but it's starting to map this out. So if we were looking at tenant engagement, we want to look at all of our personas that we've built out previously and just start to understand the channels that they hang out on. Where are they? What do they do? And if we can start to map that out again quite visually, I imagine this is what what you guys will all do kind of internally, and you'll sit here and do this for a lot of our partners, just to understand which channels are going to be most effective. So if we look here as an example, tenant engagement, we can see that through video, we're only really going to get in front of 2 demographics. So if we're looking to engage with our tenants, maybe a video isn't the best place for us to start with our engagement if we only had time to create one resource. However, something like a social carousel that's posted across sort of Facebook, let's say, if we were using that as that would probably be our first port of call, because we can see that a lot of our demographics, a lot of our personas are all there. So if we identify that Facebook, we are strong, it's green on the traffic light system, we've got a really good following. And when we've done our user research, all of our tenants tend to hang out there and they're influenced by that channel. That's going to be a really, really strong point for us to, one, spend a lot of time kind of building that up, engaging with tenants across that. Similarly, on the flip side, I think it'll help us understand any of those content gaps. So we might then understand that for this marketing campaign coming up, we need to use Facebook because that's our primary, but actually we might need to do some leaflet drops because that's going to help us engage with a slightly more difficult audience who aren't on Facebook and might not necessarily be part of that focus group. This is how we would recommend mapping it out, and it will never look this neat and it will never look this tidy, and it will be a really, really, really messy graph, but it'll help you visualize really, really quickly. That's my persona, that's my demographic, therefore that's where my message needs to be sent. And I think, again, where time is really of the essence with communication, it should be a really, really quick and efficient way to, where we talked at the start, question the content. Why am I writing it? Who's it going in front of, and why are we sending it, and where are we going to put it? This should really help you understand, this is what I want to do, so I need to send it on this channel. And if I'm going to send it on this channel, the content therefore needs to be written in this way. It'll help you create a much more efficient piece of content straight away. I think this is one of the key things that we always drill into people internally, and that, again, you'll probably go through this in a bit more detail, but we always talk about working smart, not hard. Doesn't mean we would never not work hard on a campaign, but working smart allows us to do a lot more work quickly and efficiently. And I think, again, it's about marketing efficiency. Nothing is ever going to be perfect. So how can we create something that we can make the most of? From a working smart point of view, again, Natalie, how would you kind of recommend people kind of centralize this?
So I think this is something, obviously, that we drill into everybody here, because purely on kind of a resource and time perspective, it is a really, really clever way to work. So normally what we tend to do is create a big asset, essentially, something that houses all of the information that you want to kind of talk about. And then, so take, for example, a how-to guide. That's probably going to have the most depth in terms of long form content. It's going to have kind of your visuals and any kind of stats or information that you need about kind of how to maybe sort of repair. You have that visual content, you have the step-by-step guides, you have how to kind of report it and so on. And it's taken that asset and trying to break it up into as many derivative parts as possible, because essentially you already have all of that essence of the content. And that's kind of where it comes to not working hard, because once you've done it once, then you can just spread it as kind of thinly as you want. You can push it out and create an on-site checklist for people to read. You can then maybe push a video out through your social media. You can create static ads. You can also maybe then even put a Facebook experience together, all using that same content that you have already created. So in terms of maximizing kind of your resource and your time, if you put enough effort in at the start to kind of capture all of that content and create it, it then is just, again, working smartly and trying to break it up to make the digestible content for social and kind of the more rich and helpful and supportive content for those kind of on-site content assets.
Yeah, and I think, again, really, really important pieces. Probably when going through the last slide, it can seem quite overwhelming because it looks like all of a sudden it's saying, well, there's only 3 of us in the marketing team, and how are we ever going to find enough time to write 20 articles for 20 different people on 20 different channels? I think the key point here is it's the same message you want to get across to all of them. They're just going to interact with it in a slightly different way. So absolutely, if you want people to pay their bills, well, creating a piece of video content, but also creating a social, maybe a Facebook experience and an infographic. That's 3 things that all sit as part of exactly the same asset, but will speak to 3 different audiences on 3 different channels in 3 very different ways. But we're bringing them through that conversion funnel to do the same thing. And again, it just becomes what users see as user-centric. It's personal to them. It's speaking their language. It's helping. It makes us feel like they're understood without us having to have a marketing campaign per user, because that is impossible. And if you do have the luxury to do that, then phenomenal. So I think what we're really, really keen, and I think there's nothing worse than being on kind of a presentation like something like this and not really being able to take away any sort of real-time examples. So we've put this into a few kind of scenarios that will take you through. And again, these are very, very top level, and you guys will, but it shows how kind of the process we've just talked about, how we can start to map that out and how we can start to identify the best channels and the best content to push. So when you guys are pulling together your user personas, we're going to find people are very different. People like to be spoken to in very different ways. So to give 2 examples, we've got Gary Jones. He's retired and he's been a tenant for the last 9 years. Gary knows who we are. He knows what we stand for. and he's not really that bothered. What he's interested in is sustainability, community, specialist within the area. Whereas you might have somebody like Sarah Lewis, who is a first-time buyer. She's a new tenant, and what we want to do is we want to start creating content where, again, it speaks to them on their level. So if we take reporting a repair, for example, we might have a how-to guide on how to report a repair. Now, that's a supportive piece of content. It's a piece of content that starts to build people from that consideration point of view. They've got a couple of issues. Creating that how-to guide, it's a big piece of work, and it's a lot of marketing resource and time. So we want to make sure that that's communicated efficiently to both of our audiences. We might have gated content from a downloadable guide on the website. So we might say to one audience, look, this is just for you. We've created this for you. It's a long guide. You can get all the information that you need, and you can really get into the nitty-gritty and understand it, because that's what that audience wants. But for the same how-to guide, let's summarize it. For somebody who's busy, for somebody who's constantly on the go, who doesn't have that time, if we send them that gated downloadable guide, they are never going to read it. Therefore, we're not communicating with them effectively, because whatever problem we were trying to solve with that downloadable guide, it's going to remain a problem for that audience, because they're not going to see the solution. They're not going to see the value in it. So let's take that information that we've presented to our first audience. Let's strip it back. Let's turn it into a Facebook experience, and let's put it on a channel that we know that they're going to see it within passing. We might have the same way for an infographic, understanding your repair. Again, from a community point of view, we might have an audience who just wants to have this as a leaflet drop. They want that pushed through their door. They want to sit down. They want to have time to digest it. They want a piece of content that's in their house. They don't have to log on online. They just want to be able to see it. And the next time they've got a problem, or the next time they need to book a repair, where's that leaflet? I filed it away somewhere. It's in that useful folder somewhere. That's great. But again, we might send that to another audience who they're just going to bin it. It's in the recycling within the hour. And that was a waste of marketing resource, and it was a waste of time and budget. So how can we identify the postcodes, the tenants, the areas, the demographics who we're going to send a leaflet drop to? Let's not do a blanket approach, because not everybody needs that. Not everybody sees the value in that. And actually, some of our other audiences might see value from an on-site blog. So let's take that content, let's copy and paste it, and let's put it on site, and let's send them a link via email. Let's send them a link via social. Let's turn it into a video asset over time and push it out through paid YouTube ads. Because again, we're going to have the same messaging, but the two different audiences are both going to feel heard. They're both going to engage with it. And that's going to help increase our overall kind of engagement levels. I think, again, taking this into a second scenario, paying a bill, something we all want our tenants to do online. And I'm sure everybody over the last year, certainly whilst people, tenants haven't been able to come in to physically pay bills, or if they have, there's had to be really, really strict procedures put in place. How can we make sure they do it online? And how can we make sure that if they've got problems, paying a bill is something we know a lot of people feel stressful. They feel it's a stressful scenario. A lot of people feel that there are concerns around it. People don't like and don't feel empowered when they are paying a bill. And I think that's quite a simple kind of fact. So if somebody has an issue with it, the first thing they're going to do is phone in. And we want to make sure that from a customer call center point of view, we are only taking calls for people who are really in a tough situation. And it's not the same question that's been asked 10 times that hour. So again, we might have, what do I do if I miss a payment? Now, if we sent that out through email marketing, we might reach 2 of our target audiences. That's great. But if we're only reaching 2 out of 8, well, the other 6 are going to phone in because they haven't seen the email, because it went to their junk, and they get 200 emails a day. So to manage that more effectively, again, we need to understand what that content gap is. So if we're going to send an email marketing piece out, that's great. But actually, our other audiences might come on site. And if they're going to come on site, well, let's make sure we've got frequently asked questions. What happens if I miss a payment? Let's answer that for them, and let's help them with that self-serve journey. Sending that kind of, again, that content, communicating with people on their level is going to massively help efficiency from an internal point of view, because we are answering questions that people want, and they're actually seeing our content, and they're actually engaging with it, and they're actually reading it. Again, paying a bill for somebody who's more technical, for somebody who wants that more specialized approach. Let's create an ebook. Let's send them out an ebook, everything you need to know about bills and payments. They're retired, they've been with us 9 years, they've got the time and they want to digest it and understand it. But not everybody has that time. So let's create a 5-minute version that's a condensed version of that. somebody will have 5 minutes to understand exactly what that is. And we have that as part of our onboarding process. All of these scenarios, and I'm not going to kind of go through every example, but hopefully, again, this helps you understand how you can start to map out the content types. You can match them to the personas and the audiences that you want to engage with. That can then help you understand the channels that you need to push them out on, and the different channels. There is not a one solution fits all in this scenario, but there is a way to map out the most efficient way to utilize your time, the most efficient way to ensure you're engaging with as large an audience as possible. Final scenario we have, and this is something that's often a problem, I think, again, is just getting people involved, getting people to fill out, customer satisfaction surveys, getting people to tell you what they want. Because whilst we might have that information on personas, that is going to change. And we always need this feedback. We always need to be engaging with people again. So customer satisfaction surveys, again, if we've got a persona who's always on social, that's engaging with our Facebook experiences, let's just create a social poll. They're there, we know they're there, we know they engage with our content there. Let's create a social poll. But other members of our audience and other tenants, the idea of answering something on Facebook, they might think it's stealing their data, it's going to publish it to all their friends, they don't understand it, they don't trust it. Therefore, they're not going to answer it. And we're only ever going to get a sample audience from that social poll. So let's send them it. It's a piece of gated content throughout the portal or the app. It's an email marketing piece, something that, again, what channels make them feel safe? And if they feel safe, they're more willing to engage with us and get involved. Again, it just kind of shows how we want to start mapping this out. And I think actually doing it visually like this, and again, it's never going to be this tidy, but creating things visually before you run any marketing campaigns. A lot of you over the next year, 2 years, from conversations I've had, you're all going to be looking at launching customer portals. You're going to be looking at updating apps. We're going to be looking at how we communicate the changing process for getting a new house, because once the regulations start to change, people are going to want to know whether they can actually go and view that house. Can they actually go and visit it? How do they change it? How do they get in touch with removal companies? All these things are messages that we can avoid customer call center touch points if we communicate effectively with people before that becomes a problem and an issue. If it has become a problem or an issue, that is going to naturally affect customer satisfaction, and therefore that's something that's not going to reflect well on us as businesses. Now, all of that's great, and all of that's a really efficient way to do things. However, we need to be tracking that, and we need to be measuring it. And I'm sure, again, Natalie, one of the things you'll be drilling into your team kind of at Mediaworks, and one of the things we're always told to kind of report on back to customers, is centralizing that measurement. So running these campaigns is great, but how would you kind of recommend everybody who's kind of listening? How do they track that measurement? How do they report on it? How do they learn from it?
Yeah, well, essentially what we always start off with is kind of creating campaign goals, because it always comes down to, like we've talked about, there is a variety of channels that we can kind of go through in terms of promoting your content. So all different channels and different content will have various different measures of success. And I think that's why, as an overall campaign, we want to kind of create various different goals. So just like you can see on the screen, a few examples are kind of video views. So that's obviously, if we're pushing a video, that'll determine kind of engagement, impressions of people who've seen it. If it's kind of content on site, how many people are using the site, how many sessions have happened, how many landing page views you've got. And then obviously from a social perspective, it's very much that engagement, the following increase, and number of click-through rates, and then also that customer satisfaction scores that Joe kind of mentioned before. It's kind of taken those goals as an overall campaign and really kind of drilling down to make SMART goals, because essentially those key metrics are kind of the benchmarks, whether it's within this current campaign or in a couple of months. You want to reflect and say, right, well, this is where our campaign started and this is how we build on it. Because I think the importance and kind of essence of reporting is to help you kind of learn and sculpt kind of your next strategy moving forward, which I think Joe will kind of touch on in a bit, but it's kind of like looking at how we take what we've done and learn from it and grow, because not every kind of marketing campaign should really go well, and it should never be kind of all singing and dancing. And if it does, you kind of, I need your job, because essentially like that's the best way. But it is always about kind of looking at your reports, and a few kind of tools that we use. Obviously the social channels are a main kind of point of call. They do a lot of it for you. So taking that and kind of making it into your own, Google Analytics, Hotjar, all of those kind of tools that allow you to look at customer experience, how they're engaging on site. And it is realistically bringing all of those reports into a centralized place and making it unique to you guys, because everyone will report on it different. Everybody has their own internal kind of quirks and platforms that they use, and just bringing it all together to measure the success of a whole campaign and how it can then inform and kind of allow you to move forward is definitely something that we kind of recommend and we have internally, and kind of allows us to scale essentially that campaign in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think all really, really valid points. And again, it is just, if we're putting all this time and effort in for creating this campaign, we can only really pat ourselves on the back and say we've done a good job when we can prove that in data and numbers, our engagement is increasing. And I think using that then helps give us a benchmark to understand, again, look, our personas were correct. These are the right channels. This is the right place to be engaging, because if we create a piece of content and push that out, our audience are always changing. And you know, that channel shift is going to have to be constantly updated. We did have one question that just came through, which was, how often would we recommend updating this? So in terms of your the full strategy and the way that we kind of change that, how often would you review that kind of internally?
I think obviously from our point of view, we normally check in like every quarter. It gives enough time in terms of from creating your strategy to then creating the content, because that's kind of where the heavy lifting comes in terms of creating the content, especially with kind of resources. You need to make sure that you do give enough time to create that content. And then obviously once you've kind of distributed the content, you need to allow a bit of time to obviously gain that attraction and gain that engagement. You don't want to do it too quick, because it might fall short in terms of like a content asset that could be working. It just hasn't yet had that enough time to kind of be engaged with and be delivered to people. So I definitely think check in every quarter, if not sooner, once you've kind of got that content up and running and you've got your strategy in place. I mean, the past year we've been checking in at least monthly, just purely because of how strange the times are, how quick things are changing. People are adapting quicker now than ever before, and kind of obviously relying so heavily on digital, and trying to be reactive essentially. That's another part of kind of a strategy, is just reacting to kind of current times. But I think from my point of view, definitely quarter, it's a good time. It allows you to kind of build on your strategy, adapt from reporting, but also allows that generation and of kind of engagement to start, and the attraction to help you guys kind of formulate the reports.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really, really good point. And definitely, I think key answer here is as often as you can spare the time, but quarterly as a kind of as a minimum. I think that then brings us on to, sadly, this is not a one solution fits all. And as you just said, Natalie, you know, checking in on our audience, they are always going to be changing. Everything we've talked about over the last few sessions, building out those personas, doing that kind of data gathering, understanding our channels and communicating effectively, that plan should always be changing. The way we kind of see it is, you know, we want to be at the start of any marketing campaign, you're going to review that marketing objective. You're going to understand what is it that I want to do and what is the purpose of the content that I'm pushing out. We then need to update and understand that persona data. So are these my current tenants? Is this a true visualization? We then want to be kind of proposing what kind of content we therefore create. What kind of content are we going to be writing based on those personas and based on that marketing objective? We then want to, I suppose, we're proposing channels, and we're understanding exactly where we want to kind of, again, communicate effectively, what channels it's going to go on. That's going to therefore lead to the kind of content that we want to produce. Therefore, we can start to communicate effectively. Now, at the end of that campaign, once we start to report, that is going to come full circle. And again, next campaign, again, we're reviewing objectives and how we kind of change that. I think there's one thing that's just come through in the chat there. 2 seconds. So yeah, what kind of tools would we recommend to use and gather this information? Well, actually, it's a great question, because you've literally just, it's answered on this next on this next slide. So again, a lot of this we have as part of that process, but at the start of at the start of building out those personas, you know, we talked a lot in the last session about the actual tools you can break down. But I think, Natalie, from your point of view, I imagine brand we're going to be using, YouGov, customer data, things like brand search. What are the perception that people have of us? What are the top news articles? What are forums saying? What are our customers saying?
100%. From
a marketing point of view, I know we use things like Also Asked, Answer the Public. What are the generalistic views? What do people kind of make of that? From an intelligence point of view, obviously Google Trends, I think people would use. On the social listening side, how would you recommend people kind of utilize that?
Simply just type your brand name into any social media platform and just see what people are talking about. Whether you're listening in terms of perception, like you just mentioned there, in terms of what people are, your opinions are of your brand, what people are saying about you, that might stem some of the content that you want to do in terms of overcoming those pain points of your customers if they can't get through to you, or kind of they feel overwhelmed in terms of information and they need something that's a bit more digestible. Comments essentially are quite good in terms of getting that customer feedback, that might not necessarily be directed at you guys. Or we sometimes use social listening to just see what's going on in the market. What are kind of peers within your kind of sector, and what are they talking about? How can you kind of get ahead in terms of creating content that necessarily might not be targeted towards your brand, but you can then kind of have that front foot and create additional content just to make sure that you're relevant, that you stay in kind of in touch with kind of trends that are going on, being reactive, being supportive. And then again, it's just that value add. And essentially, once you're creating all of this content that's obviously user-centric, you're building that long-term relationship, which obviously is so valued against any of your tenants or your customers.
Yeah. So I think if anybody's got any questions on the back of this, or they'd like us to send kind of links through to some of the tools we use, again, more than happy to kind of do a little bit of a knowledge share, because I think it's really, really important that whilst all of this stuff hopefully comes across as the right way to approach this, I think it needs to be accessible. It needs to be accessible from you guys kind of internally. Otherwise, it becomes part of a dream strategy that you can't implement. So please do feel free to reach out, and more than happy to kind of send you links or downloads or anything that you might need. And I think that kind of brings us to the end, really. So I don't know if there's any kind of questions, because I'm quite aware of time as well. We did have a case study in here, and I think, you know, just to kind of prove to you guys that it's real. When we were launching sort of Home Group's website and going through the process with them, again, we implemented kind of a really similar strategy, making sure that we are communicating with users to make sure that they kind of adopt that self-serve. Because we communicated effectively, because we understood who we were trying to engage with and the right content that's going to speak to them, we saw a 486% increase in online interaction in the repairs section from a year-on-year point of view. Again, it's one example from one scenario, from one problem that somebody was seeing, but I'm sure you can all imagine the difference that made to a business, to see nearly a 500% increase in interaction self-serve online, because that communication was just effective, because we were communicating effectively with people at their level where they want to be communicated. So that is us in a nutshell. I'm going to stop the share, but if there's any questions, please do feel free to kind of drop them in the Q&A below. I'm more than happy to hang around for a few minutes and kind of answer them.
While we're just giving people a chance to think of any last questions, I just wanted to say thank you for that. I thought it was really useful. In particular, the case studies of the personas I thought was interesting. And for me, I suppose it's that engagement piece. You know, how do we engage? Tenant engagement is going to be huge this year. It's been huge for a long time. And things have moved on. I mean, I started in the sector it was about 12 years ago. And tenant engagement then was get a group of tenants around a table with a cup of coffee and find out what they think. But what you always ended up with was the same group of tenants every time, because that's how they wanted to do it. And I don't think back then we certainly didn't, in my experience, know there were so many other ways to do it. So I think it's about increasing the number of people we can engage with, but also increasing the range of ways they can engage and finding the right one for them.
Absolutely. And I think that helps give you a much broader solution, because if you are only ever fixing the problems that those same 10 people are telling you about, and you're only ever fixing those problems for them, then actually the other 1,000 tenants who you've got probably, and I think it sounds daft, but the 10 people who you're speaking to don't represent your tenants, because actually otherwise you'd have 1,000 of them in there wanting to be part of it.
True.
So they're a very, very different user type. But it is really, really easy to get kind of bogged down in that, where you say, I need an answer for this and I need a reason for it. And somebody's going, I'll give you an answer and a reason. And I think that's great, but I want to understand what everybody else thinks as well. And the only way we'll ever get that is on the channels where they feel comfortable giving us that information.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, we do always see it. I think we see the same when we're doing research, and it gets really frustrating because you're like, please, I just need somebody else to tell me why this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's not that people don't want to tell you, it's just that we've got to find the right way to
Absolutely
comfortable in sharing it, like you said. Yeah, it sort of really struck a chord with me, that bit.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I think for everybody else, I don't think there's any more questions kind of come through. But if anybody does, I'm sure you can kind of contact Kate, and Kate, please feel free to kind of share our details if anybody's got any questions afterwards. And I imagine there'll be a recording of this circulated at some point over the next couple of weeks or so. If anything does come to mind, inbox is always open. Feel free to kind of reach out, and we can help where we can.
Yeah. Brilliant. And there'll be more of these coming up sort of as we move through the year as well. So we'll keep you posted on the next one in the series. But thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. Appreciate it. And we'll get practicing wearing real shoes at some point in the near future, hopefully.
Yeah. I'll be selling shumpers online. I was going to say I'll set up a new business. No, thank you very much for having us on. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's attended. I hope you found it really useful. As we said, we'll get everything out to you by email as soon as we can as well. So see you again soon, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.